This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Thank you for tuning in this week's NC Spin. Our whole lives have been changed because of this pandemic, and this week's NC Spin is a living example of that. We've had to change our production graphics and format just a little bit, but nevertheless, we've got an interesting show for you this week with one of North Carolina's leading legislators. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Senator Jay Chadhuri is a lawyer by profession, but he's also served in echelons of state government and knows his way around pretty well. His peers elected him as the Democrat minority whip in the state Senate, so we're glad to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you this week. Welcome, Jay.
Yeah, great to be with you.
I guess the question that everybody would like to know to start off with is how we're doing. We've often said North Carolina is never better than in times of emergency. So this week's pandemic has always changed everything in North Carolina. How are we doing? How are we responding to COVID-19?
So I think we're responding to COVID-19 quite well, and I think we're doing much better compared to our other states. And I think that's for a couple of reasons, Tom. I think number one is Governor Cooper has been getting advice from Secretary of DHHS, Health and Human Services, Mandy Cohen, who is a physician. I think that helps immensely.
She's a rock star.
She really is a rock star, and I think she deserves a lot of credit for our response. And I think having a physician believing in science, being data-driven, I think has helped the governor well. And I think secondly, Governor Cooper has moved quite quickly on a number of the measures that are needed to address the virus. So that includes—
Some would say too quickly, perhaps, but I think that time has shown that it was a good response.
There's certainly an argument to say that he's moved too quickly, but to your point, as you know, there have been two models that have come out now that suggest that we are going to see a flattening of the curve within either a week or a month from now. So those measures that he's put in place, whether it's a stay-at-home order, whether it's closing down schools early or shutting down non-essential businesses, I think that those responses are going to help the state in the long term.
We've been to the Emergency Operations Center and watched firsthand what was going over there. It's 24 hours a day over the last 30 days, and Mike Sprayberry, our Emergency Operations Director, and the whole team is really doing a great job. Governor Cooper issued stay-home orders. Now, Unicast, which is a company that tracks where you are using your mobile telephone, Unicast has tracked North Carolina to see how well we're staying home, and they gave us a D- so far as the ratings were concerned. Why is it people aren't obeying this stay-home order, or do you think they're doing it pretty well?
Well, I've seen similar analytics to those stay-at-home orders. I think you've got to take a number of things into account. I mean, obviously, we are a rural and an urban state, so when you're measuring social mobility, for example, they may be different. But I think in the large part, if you compare where we are to other states, I still think that we are doing better. And I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind is it takes a while for the public to adjust their behavior. And we're going into the second weekend of the stay-at-home order. I fully expect to see an increase in the number of citizens that are participating.
There are a number of communities that have established curfews for their citizens. Do you think that's something North Carolina ought to consider?
I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think as we get more data and we look at different communities and where there may be emerging hotspots, I think that might be something that could be considered by Governor Cooper.
Let's talk about the legislature, because there's a lot of talk about when are y'all coming back into session. Now, You're scheduled to come back April 28th for the so-called short session, which sometimes isn't. But you're scheduled for April 28th. There are a lot of people that are saying, hey, you need to come back earlier. What's the latest on this?
So my expectation is that we will be back on April 28th.
Not before.
I don't think we will be here before, and part of the reason I don't think we will come back before is because a lot of the work is already being done in both chambers. As you know, Speaker Moore has set a COVID task force committee, including subcommittees. We have working groups on the Senate side too. As those committee work progresses, we should be ready to be able to pass the necessary legislation by April 28th.
But there's some people that are saying there's some legislation that needs to be done right away. I mean, our state has seen over 500,000 people apply for unemployment, a record number, more than many states across the United States so far. The maximum a person can draw on unemployment is $350 a week for 12 weeks. Now, there are a lot of people saying, hey, we've got $3.9 billion in North Carolina's unemployment trust funds. Let's open the doors a little bit and loosen those restrictions. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I agree with the opinion that the $350 as a maximum is too low. We are the lowest in the country as far as our payout, and our duration is also is the lowest. We pay only 12 weeks out, and so I think in order for us to make sure that we are helping workers and families, we need to make sure that we address those unemployment benefits to get those families through these hard times.
We know, it's not a secret, that the governor and the legislative leadership have not gotten along very well together over the last couple of years. We understand, though, there's some great discussions that are taking place right now between legislative leaders and the governor, and they seem to be getting along. How are you experiencing that?
There is. I mean, there's an open line of communication both between the governor and the legislative leadership, but there's also an open line of communication in the Senate between Leader Dan Blue and Pro Tem Berger. And we, in fact, had a call with all 50 state senators last week and got a joint briefing by the fiscal staff, getting us up to date on the federal stimulus package. And I think you'll continue to see those of us working across the aisle to come to a common solution.
In fact, Dan told me that there are morning calls in which you're discussing a lot of this stuff. Let me get back to this unemployment thing. There are a number of people who are saying we can't handle what's going on right now for too much longer. It is going to just drive us into not only a recession, but a depression. Has there been any discussion going on in the leadership of the legislature about a plan to figure out, once it's time, once we feel like we're safe, a plan for how we're going to recover, what we're going to do, what steps we're going to take?
There have been some discussions, but I think the main focus of the April 28th short session will be focusing on short-term solutions.
I was going to ask you about that because in many instances, when the legislature comes back into short session, sometimes they end up being long sessions.
Right.
Do you think this year in the short session that what we're primarily going to be doing is taking care of COVID-19 type issues, and those nagging issues that were left over from 2019 will just get moved back to January of 2021 for that session?
I think you're right. I think that the session that we come back for will be very narrowly focused on addressing the COVID virus. I think it will focus on making sure that we put money towards our public health system. It'll be money towards our education system to make sure that we address issues like food insecurity. It'll be dollars that may go towards helping our municipalities. But I think it will be very limited, and I think the longer term discussions that we're going to have will have to be postponed for another day.
Let's talk about some of those issues specifically. Teachers and school personnel, can they be pretty well assured that their paychecks are going to continue?
They will. I mean, you know, the good news is, and we can talk about this, is obviously we've got a substantial rainy day fund, and because of the budget impasse last year, now we're also sitting on a $1.2 billion surplus. So the economic, the fiscal health of the state is actually quite well.
How about state employees? Many of them have been furloughed. They can't come back to their jobs. What's going to happen with their paychecks? Are they going to be continued?
I fully would expect that those paychecks would continue as well for state employees. And you know, as a reminder, you know, the last budget, the mini budget that we passed, actually gave our state employees a pay increase.
The federal relief package that was passed. What is it, $2 trillion in relief that was passed, and they're now working on a new one, I understand. But it gave every citizen a check. Is North Carolina thinking about perhaps using some of that rainy day fund, that surplus that you were talking about, maybe, and giving checks to the people? Last year, during the budget negotiations, we had that $980 million or $900 million surplus, and there was a discussion about sending every taxpayer a check. Any discussion of that now?
So the discussions have happened publicly. As you know, Senator Heiss and Senator Alexander authored an op-ed piece where they had argued for doing a one-time check back to the public, and I suspect that will still be part of the debate, but I think there are other issues that we ought to take a look at as far as solutions.
Have you heard any discussion about, okay, so we've got all of these funds. Any discussion about how far down y'all are willing to drain them before you feel like you've got to put a halt on it?
I have not been privy to those discussions. I suspect once the governor comes out with a proposal that looks at what the supplemental appropriation ought to be in addressing the COVID-19 virus, we will have those discussions back and forth between the General Assembly and the governor's office.
And it's not just people who are suffering here. Many local governments are really straining because their revenues are drying up, and the federal package gave localities and counties a certain amount of money from this tax relief package that they passed. Any discussion about maybe helping our local government somehow in this?
Well, we've certainly heard from the North Carolina League of Municipalities, and that is an area that I think has to be addressed both by state government, but as you mentioned, the federal stimulus package also provides additional dollars to those municipalities.
While we're on the issue of local governments, a lot of them are asking the questions, can we relax the open meeting rules during this time of crisis? Any discussion on that so far?
Well, we got an opinion from Attorney General Josh Stein that laid out, I think, some clear guidance on how municipalities can put in place open meetings. And in fact, I think the city of Raleigh just had their first meeting coming back since the virus, and I think we will see more of that, and we'll see more of it similar to what we're seeing on the House side with committee meetings that they've been holding.
So I think I hear you saying that it's probably, during time of crisis, we can relax that to a certain extent.
Well, look, I would argue that the business of governing does not end because we are dealing with a pandemic. If anything, the public is now looking to government to lead on these issues.
But you got this problem from the standpoint of people have to be separated, and you're still having governmental decisions on the local level that are having to be made. Let's talk a little bit about small businesses, because 7 out of 10 people who have jobs in this state work in small companies, family-owned small businesses. It's not working. And I've heard many small business employers say, I am struggling like everything to try to keep my people and not have to lay them off. We know that a lot of them have been. The Fed started this loan program, which frankly most small businesses will tell you is a disaster. If you can get through to make an application, you have no idea in the world. Any help we can give these small businesses?
Yes, absolutely. I have been an early proponent of making sure that we have a small business bridge loan established here in North Carolina, and thankfully the Golden Leaf Foundation now has put into place a rapid recovery loan program to address exactly the issue that you're talking about. That rapid recovery loan program can only fund up to $15 million. It's already been oversubscribed, and my sense is we come back to the General Assembly, we need to see that rapid recovery loan.
But isn't that another reason why you need to come back before April 28th?
Well, I suspect that given some of the discretion that the governor's office has right now, they'll be able to backstop some of the loans that are being provided. But we need to look at the loan program as also filling a gap.
Some of these small businesses are saying to me, Senator, loans. I'm just struggling for survival. How long is it going to take me to pay back a loan? I need some help. I need some relief. I need a check without a loan. What do you think?
Well, look, I've had conversations with a lot of small businesses, and there have been some discussions about a grant program that can help with those businesses. But I think it's going to have to be a combination of loans and grant programs. I mean, the loan program that we have with the Golden Leaf Foundation is one that's for 6 months with zero interest.
Yeah. You talked about Attorney General Josh Stein a few minutes ago. Attorney General Stein says that there are instances that he's hearing where there's price gouging, where there's scamming taking place. We have laws about that. Do we need to tighten the penalties for people who do that?
Well, I think we should wait and see how those prosecutions come about.
Are you hearing any calls from your constituents about it?
I have not received any calls, but I'm well aware that General Stein has identified a number of vendors, including those that have been selling on Amazon, that have been engaged in price gouging, and I suspect when we are in a crisis, we will see more of that.
I mean, I heard about face masks that normally cost like 90 cents a piece that are selling for $7 a piece. Now, they're not any more valuable other than from a supply and demand perspective, but that seems a little bit heavy. Let's switch over for just a second. How is this virus going to impact our elections? We've got elections coming up in November. You know, it's really interesting. We had the primaries March 3rd.
Right.
Well, beginning March 5th and 6th, all of a sudden, all the attention went to coronavirus, COVID-19. You're not hearing much about elections anymore. How is all this going to impact the November elections?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because the virus impacts not only the economy and our public health, but our elections, which are a fundamental part of our democracy. I think it could have a huge impact on the election, whether it's how we go voting in polling sites, how nursing facilities carry out elections that they have, and what it means to do absentee ballot voting, which we ought to think about extending.
I was getting ready to say, should we loosen the requirements on absentee mail-in ballots? Because a number of states, that's all they do now.
I would say two things we need to do for absentee ballots. I mean, number one is we need to make sure that people can phone or email or fax when they're requesting an absentee ballot. That'll make it easier. And I think secondly, we need to have prepaid postage on those absentee ballots so it makes it easier for people to return those.
Yeah. Let's move over to the budget because you mentioned the fact that when y'all come back into session, first point, are you going to try to pass the budget that was vetoed and not successfully overridden? Or are you just going to wait and pass a new budget altogether starting in July 1?
Yeah, I think we will look at a new budget in July 1. My impression is that we're going to focus on a short-term response to the virus when we come back on April 28th.
Well, isn't that going to be kind of problematic in a way? I mean, if you think about it, tax revenues to the state of North Carolina have fallen off the cliff. Mm-hmm. Gas taxes have it's just boom, the graph goes straight down. Sales taxes are down. We are postponing the deadline for filing personal income taxes till July 15th. Now, wait a minute. The new budget's supposed to start July 1. You're not going to know what your availability is, are you?
Well, look, I think that that's the bad news, but the good news, as I mentioned before, is we have a cushion from the budget surplus. We've got a great rainy day fund, and we also have $150 billion that have been allocated to states from the federal stimulus package. I think all of those aspects should be able to allow us to get through this budget cycle so that we're focused on looking at a new budget starting July 1.
Okay, but if you're going to do that, how are you going to know how much money you got to work with? I mean, without having to maybe fall back on some of those budget surpluses that you've got. Barry Boardman says that North Carolina the state government budget is going to suffer $1 billion, billion with a B, $1 billion shortfall as a result of this crisis that we're in right now. That's got to be a little bit worrisome if we're trying to put another $23 billion state budget together, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the estimate is actually $1.5 to $2.5 billion.
Really?
So it's even larger. But to your point, we're going to have to throw out all the assumptions that we make on the revenue and on the spending side and start with a new budget as we get ready to look at the 21-22 budget cycle.
What are some of the pieces of legislation that you and your caucus are talking about proposing during this short session?
So, we have multiple working groups. I mean, there's active discussions around unemployment insurance benefits that we talked about. We've talked about helping small businesses. So we've talked about the bridge loan, and we've talked about some tax relief, I think, for those businesses. And lastly, we've talked about what elections ought to look like with election reforms, which might look at making access to absentee ballots easier.
Any discussion at all about postponing the elections?
No. I mean, the election
It's a
should
federal
and must
date.
happen in November.
Okay. So unless the federal government decides to move the national election date?
I mean, I don't know if that's ever, that would be
I don't know if
unprecedented.
I've never heard it being done.
I think if anything, and we see this in Wisconsin, I mean, ultimately the decision to hold these elections will happen at the state level and not be dictated by the federal government.
One of the pieces of legislation, obviously, that's going to have to be considered is by moving the time when state taxes are due to July 15th. We've got a clause calling for penalties and interest if you haven't paid by April 15th. I would suspect that's going to have to be changed.
That will have to be changed. I get a lot of emails from my constituents about that, and Department of Revenue has indicated that they will waive those interest and penalties.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about legislature coming back, assuming that it's April 28th, whenever it is. We're still in this stay home order. Now, we're going to be bringing 170 people to Jones Street in Raleigh to go into the legislative building. Article 2, Section 2 of the state constitution, and I wrote it down, I want to quote it. Neither house shall proceed upon public business unless a majority of all of its members are actually present. That means y'all got to be there in that complex, in that building. I talked to Gary Cohen, who has probably forgotten more about legislative rules and laws than most of us will ever know. And he says he can't see any way around having to have a majority of the members present in order to call session back in. How big a problem is this going to be?
Look, I think we will address the problem. I've spoken to Mr. Cohen as well. A couple of things I would share with you. Number one is the Constitution actually says actually present. I think it's a question of where we are present, in the chamber, in the building.
Yeah, he and I talked about that.
Right.
You could be in your office in the legislative office building and still be present.
That's right. And there have been discussions, I think there are ideas that have been floated where you could actually have members that could come into the chamber and vote and then leave, so we're still practicing social distancing. But we can also have an adjournment resolution with the majority of the senators and then decide to adjourn to a different venue where you can actually practice social distancing, such as convening in the convention center.
So would it be kind of like in the Congress where you lengthen the amount of voting time on a particular piece of legislation? Because you can listen in your office, you can listen to the session as it is taking place, so you know what's going on.
Yeah.
But so we're going to have a vote on Bill 1, 2, 3, 4, and you've got 5 minutes. So you're going to have to come from your office, go to your desk, and cast your vote.
I think some kind of method to that, whether it's by alphabetical order or in order to make sure that we're still practicing social distancing, I think can be carried out for us to still meet our legislative obligations.
Former House Speaker Joe Mavretic, who, as you know, is a panelist on my show, wrote a column that we published a week or so ago, and he said, you know, in the wireless electronic age that we live in right now, there is no emergency operations plan for our legislature. We've got an emergency operation plan for the state government, but not for the legislature. And that there ought to be something done so that in the event we have another one, and the governor's declared a state of emergency, that you don't have to leave your home and jeopardize your health or safety in order to be able to stay in session. You can do it FaceTime or Zoom or one of these electronic ways. Any thought, any discussion about this? Any thoughts from your standpoint about how we go about doing this?
I mean, look, you could still do it. You could still have a majority of senators be present, and the others that may fall under a more high-risk category be able to vote by calling in their vote. But as long as we have a majority of the senators that are there where we can meet quorum, I think there's a great opportunity for us to change the rules.
We got a lot of infrastructure problems which have been piling up on each other, and this is only exacerbating it from that standpoint. Any thought about maybe having a bond referendum this fall and being able to put people to work, like the old WPA or PWA that Roosevelt started. Put people to work. If you're going to give them a check, put them to work. What do you think?
Look, I love that idea when you've got almost 500,000 North Carolinians that are going to be filing for unemployment. And
We'll have more than that.
And we're looking for employment. I think given the fact that we've got an $8 billion infrastructure need in the state, if not more than that, I think it's a great way to match the needs of the citizens with what we need to do as a state.
And I think it makes people feel better about themselves that they've got a place to go every day and something to be able to do. What was it they say? 3 things in life: someone to love, something to do, and something to look forward to. I think that's the way that goes. Any other thoughts you've got about this upcoming legislative session, Senator?
Well, as I mentioned, I think the legislative session is going to be pretty tightly focused. It's going to focus on the issues that the virus is impacting, whether it's healthcare, education, unemployment benefits, or election reform. And once we tackle what happens in that short session, I think we will be back later in the summer to look at the budget.
So, in other words, there will be a short session, but there might be another called session before the end of the year.
That would be my expectation.
Well, thank you for watching this edition of NC Spin. To stay informed all during the week, sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, read my column, go to ncspin.com or NCSpin on Facebook. Senator Jay Chadhuri, we thank you so much for being with us. Last week we closed the show, and I want to do it the same way this week. Stay informed, stay separated, and stay safe. And watch out for the spin. In more than 21 years on NC Spin, I never endorsed a product or sponsor, but I volunteered to do this message for family physicians. Over the past 40 years, my family doctor could quickly diagnose my illnesses because he knew my medical history. Evidence suggests I'll live longer, have a higher quality of life, and save 33% on health care costs. I believe in my trusted relationship with my family physician.
Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisor for life.
Life's busy, but you're in control. As an electric cooperative member, you have access to lots of tools to help manage your home energy use and budget, so you can focus on what's most important.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV.